In my 20s, I was a flurry of activity. I would juggle dozens of balls. I would burn the midnight oil. I would do everything that I could to crush it at work. In my 20s, I aimed for the fancy title and got it faster than I anticipated. I navigated politics. I embraced crappy tasks. I made sure that I was responsible for deliverables that were public and visible and easy to quantify. In my 20s, I was carried largely by talent. I was given some gifts and I worked hard to try to make the most of them. I overcame weaknesses and character defects by demonstrating mastery in areas of strength. And I built systems into my life that allowed me to learn and improve at a rate that was relatively unusual. In my 20s, I was promoted and awarded and rewarded and applauded. In my 20s, I wanted to be successful and liked and be the best at what I did. And I wanted it immediately. I was obsessed with this idea of not just being successful, but being young and successful. Life was a race, and I was a sprinter. In my 20s, I had an enormous fear that I wasn't good enough. Every time I would sit down in front of a blank screen to try to design something new or write something new, I was convinced that this would be the time that I would screw up and that everybody would finally realize that I was a hack. In my 20s, I cared immensely about the opinions of others. I pretended that I was my own man. I pretended that I was driven by a power that was purely internal. But deep down, most of my actions were designed to get you to think how smart and talented and witty and charming I was, that I was worth loving, that I was worth being around. In my 20s, I was very undisciplined. I worked hard, but usually what I wanted to work on, I avoided accountability. I enjoyed being unreachable. I wanted to be like Moses coming down from the mountain with the stone tablets. And, regardless of how flighty I was, the quality of the work that I would do would be such that people would just, be blown away and would tolerate all of these character flaws. In my 20s, I would bristle at the suggestion that my work or my idea or my decision wasn't great, wasn't perfect as is, that it didn't emerge fully formed from the very first time without any collaboration or any help from anybody. And even when I was wrong and I knew it, I wasn't willing to lose the battle without winning the war. And that manifested itself with my colleagues. It manifested itself even with my boss. It manifested itself with my wife early in our marriage. And to say something that I did was flawed or stupid was the same thing as saying that I was flawed or stupid. In my 20s, I used jokes at my own expense to mask a celestial ego. I had learned the art of self deprecation as a way to convince people that I wasn't, a narcissist. I used my talent and I used bursts of hard work to mask discipline, and I used my charisma to mask character. Life was a race, and I was a sprinter. And then I fell down for the first time at work. And then I became a father. And then my 20s turned into my 30s. And a lot changed. In my 30s, I realized that I had some fundamental issues that talent and extroversion couldn't fix, character traits that were undesirable, a shaky foundation underneath a shiny facade. And I realized that unless I made some large changes to my life, I risked causing some pretty major problems. In my 30s, I realized that my son and then my daughter wouldn't care about what my job title was or how much money I made or the new cool product that I helped build. I realized that they would care much more about whether I'm present when we're in the same room together, whether I care about their day instead of crushing it at night. They would want to know that I cared more about their drawing or how basketball practice was than whatever is on my iPhone. In my 30s, I realized that my wife wouldn't care about who I had lunch with or who retweeted me or who wants me to talk at what event, but she would care immensely that we have regular date nights. And she would want to know that I'm not working after the kids have gone to bed instead of talking to her about how her day was. She wanted me to know that I care more about her than our shiny new office space. In my 30s, I realized that nobody actually thinks of me as a funny Howard Rourke or a pale George Clooney. In fact, nobody's really thinking about me at all. No one really cares, whether I fail or whether I succeed. They're spending their time primarily thinking about themselves and their issues and their fears and their insecurities. No one was paying attention to whether or not I would go, several months without writing something. Nobody would wonder why I was at fewer networking events. And I realized that I was pretty obsessed with convincing an imaginary crowd that I was somebody important. In my 30s, I realized that that work is important, my job is important, but legacy is not. That my achievements live on inside of my head and on a resume, and that's kind of it. And even if I build something big and visible that everybody marvels at, it's not going to survive probably as long as I do. When I leave that company, it will be shocking how quickly people move on and aren't thinking about me with any sort of regularity. And when I die eventually, my funny jokes or my writing or my great products will probably pretty quickly be forgotten. And what will remain are the relationships and the people who showed up at my funeral and why, and the impact that I may have made in their lives. And I realized that for a big chunk of my early career, I had turned work from an important thing into the most important thing. And I was obsessed with building a castle made out of sand. In my 30s, I realized that I needed to be much more firmly grounded in things that matter the most, that my job is a subset of my work. It's a subset of the lasting good that I create in the world, and that my work is a subset of my life, which is just the person that I'm becoming. I needed to become somebody that had deeper roots. I needed to be the tree that bears its fruit in season, whose leaf does not wither. In my 30s, I realized that I needed a healthy dose of discipline. I needed to get up each morning at a consistent time. I needed to eat breakfast that was good for me at the table with my family, or skip breakfast, do the intermittent fasting thing, but still be at the table with my family. I needed to be able to stick to a workout regimen for more than 3 months. I needed to take on the difficult project and make the difficult call. I needed to listen when people were talking to me instead of thinking of the next witty thing I'm going to say as soon as their mouth stops moving. I needed to eat a dinner that's good for me at the table with my family. I needed to read stories to my kiddos and to go to bed at a reasonable time instead of long after my wife had fallen asleep. In my 30s, I realized that I needed to take care of my soul. I needed to care less about what you think about me. I needed to model what a good man looks like to my kids. I needed to consistently be the kind of husband that my wife deserves. And I needed to be the kind of friend that my friends deserve. I needed to be the kind of man who finishes a race well, not simply starts a race well. I was right. Life is a race, but life is not a sprint. Life is a marathon.